Janine changed Aunt Lydia forever in The Handmaid's Tale. But 4 years later, the Testaments may have introduced someone who could become even more important to her story. And after the shocking events of the season finale, it suddenly feels like history is repeating itself. Because the look on Aunt Lydia's face when she found Becca wasn't just horror, it looked familiar. And if the parallels the show has established continue into season 2, Becca could end up becoming the person who finally turns Gilead's most loyal servant into one of its greatest enemies. Before we get into that theory, let's quickly recap what season 1 of The Testaments has been building. Unlike the terrifying woman audiences knew in The Handmaid's Tale, Aunt Lydia is noticeably different here. She's softer, more compassionate, and increasingly disturbed by the corruption around her. At the same time, the finale showed Becca suffering in ways that clearly shook Aunt Lydia. That moment immediately brought back memories of her complicated relationship with Janine and raised an interesting possibility. What if Janine was only the beginning of Aunt Lydia's awakening, and Becca becomes the next chapter? Throughout The Handmaid's Tale, Janine occupied a unique place in Aunt Lydia's life. Out of all the handmaids under her supervision, Janine was the one Aunt Lydia seemed to care for most deeply. She often referred to the handmaids as her girls, but her relationship with Janine always felt more personal. Janine's emotional vulnerability and her ability to maintain hope despite endless suffering seemed to awaken something maternal inside Aunt Lydia. Of course, that affection was deeply flawed. The tragedy of their relationship was that Aunt Lydia genuinely believed she was helping Janine, even when she was hurting her. Everything she did was filtered through Gilead's twisted ideology. In her mind, discipline was love, punishment was guidance, obedience was protection. She thought she was saving Janine, when in reality she was contributing to the suffering she claimed to be preventing. And that contradiction became one of the most fascinating aspects of Aunt Lydia's character. For years, she devoted herself completely to Gilead because she believed it was righteous. Whenever she witnessed cruelty or corruption, she didn't blame the system itself. Instead, she blamed individuals who had failed to live up to Gilead's ideals. She convinced herself that the foundation was good, even when the people running it weren't. But slowly, that faith began to crack. One of the most memorable moments from the final season came when Aunt Lydia found Janine inside Jezebel's. The shock on her face said everything. For years, she had been told that retired handmaids were rewarded for their service. They were supposedly honored for their sacrifices. Instead, she found one of the people she cared about trapped in one of Gilead's darkest institutions. It was a devastating revelation. And yet, even then, Aunt Lydia wasn't ready to completely abandon her beliefs. Her immediate reaction was prayer. She still wanted to believe that God and Gilead were one and the same. She still thought the corruption she was witnessing represented isolated failures, rather than proof that the entire system was rotten. But Janine's greatest impact on Aunt Lydia came later. During June's final mission, the handmaid's escape nearly fell apart because of Aunt Lydia. June pleaded with her, trying to appeal to her conscience. But what ultimately reached Aunt Lydia wasn't June's anger or accusations. It was Janine. Janine simply told the truth. She explained how much damage Aunt Lydia's version of help had caused over the years. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't scream at her. She simply forced Aunt Lydia to confront reality. And for perhaps the first time, Aunt Lydia listened. That moment changed something inside her. But now the Testaments may have introduced another person capable of reaching her. And that person is Becca. The finale gave viewers one of the most heartbreaking moments of the season when Aunt Lydia discovered Becca imprisoned. Thanks to Ann Dowd's incredible performance, the emotions running through Lydia's mind were impossible to miss. There was confusion, sadness, anger, and perhaps most importantly, disappointment. Not disappointment in Becca, disappointment in what Gilead had done to her. And that's where the similarities between Becca and Janine become so interesting. Like Janine, Becca has suffered injustices that even Gilead's own philosophy struggles to justify. Both women became victims of a system that claimed to protect them. Both experienced suffering that exposed a hypocrisy buried beneath Gilead's promises. But despite those similarities, Becca possesses a very different personality. Before her life became even darker, Janine retained a kind of innocent optimism. Even after enduring unimaginable trauma, she still managed to smile, laugh, and hope. That optimism might have made it easier for Aunt Lydia to continue believing things could eventually improve if everyone stayed faithful to Gilead's teachings. Becca is different. She doesn't hide her misery. Throughout the season, she carried herself with an overwhelming sadness that she never tried to disguise. During the wedding ceremony and secateurs, Becca looked emotionally disconnected. Her eyes were distant. Her expression was heavy. She looked like someone who had already given up on the possibility of happiness. And perhaps that's what makes her so dangerous to Aunt Lydia's worldview, because suffering that obvious becomes impossible to explain away. You can't dismiss it as temporary rebellion. You can't blame it on disobedience. You can't convince yourself that everything will eventually work out. Becca's pain is visible. And if Aunt Lydia truly loves her girls, then watching Becca continue suffering may be something she simply cannot ignore. What's especially interesting is how much Aunt Lydia herself has changed. The woman we are seeing in the Testaments is almost unrecognizable compared to the terrifying figure audiences first met in The Handmaid's Tale. This is the same woman who once shocked Janine with a cattle prod, the same woman who organized a fake mass execution to terrorize dozens of handmaids, the same woman whose presence inspired fear everywhere she went. But time has changed her. Compared to the ruthless person viewers once knew, the Testaments presents a much softer and more compassionate Aunt Lydia. In fact, she often appears more understanding than many of the other aunts around her. We saw this clearly when Agnes approached her regarding Dr. Grove's misconduct. Other aunts were quick to dismiss such concerns. Aunt Vidala immediately corrected Huldah when similar accusations were raised. But Aunt Lydia reacted differently. She listened. She believed Agnes, and she immediately began planning Dr. Grove's downfall. That level of empathy would have been nearly impossible to imagine years earlier. Perhaps even more surprising was her response when Agnes revealed that she knew June was her biological mother. In the world of Gilead, conversations about biological parents were heavily suppressed, and considering June's reputation as an enemy of the state, viewers might have expected Aunt Lydia to react harshly. Instead, she responded with remarkable tenderness. "I knew your mother. Quite well, actually. One thing I can say about her is that she never gave up." That line said so much. Years ago, Aunt Lydia would probably have condemned June as a criminal. Now she speaks about her with respect, which raises an interesting question. Has Aunt Lydia already begun rejecting Gilead emotionally? Maybe she simply hasn't fully admitted it to herself yet. And perhaps Becca's suffering could become the final emotional catalyst that pushes her from quiet doubts into open rebellion. That possibility becomes even more fascinating when you consider the flashbacks introduced in Episode 6, Stadium. Those scenes showed viewers a side of Aunt Lydia that was genuinely disturbing. We learned more about her early days after Gilead's rise and saw just how ruthless survival had made her. She was willing to sacrifice people she once knew in order to secure her own position within the new regime. Those flashbacks weren't just there to provide backstory. They served another purpose. They reminded viewers how far Aunt Lydia has come. And if Season 2 continues to contrast present-day Lydia with the woman she once was, the emotional impact could become even stronger. Every act of kindness in the present would stand beside memories of her cruelty in the past. Every moment of compassion would highlight how much she has changed. Because redemption only matters when we understand what someone is seeking redemption from. And that is what makes Aunt Lydia one of the most fascinating characters in the entire franchise. Ann Dowd never portrays her as completely evil or completely good. Instead, she plays Aunt Lydia as someone trapped between guilt, faith, and denial. Someone desperately wanting to believe she served God. Someone terrified of admitting that she helped build a nightmare. And perhaps someone who is slowly realizing that love without truth can become another form of cruelty. Janine taught Aunt Lydia her methods cause suffering, but Becca may teach her something even more devastating. That the system she devoted her life to was never simply damaged by a few bad people. It may have been fundamentally corrupt from the very beginning. And if that's where season 2 is heading, then the woman who once terrorized handmaids could soon become one of the greatest threats Gilead has ever faced. Because Janine opened Aunt Lydia's eyes, but Becca may be the person who finally makes her see.